Welcome to Module 5. As always, we're going to go ahead and start with a short meditation. Go ahead and get comfortable and in a good position for breathing and relaxation, or if you'd prefer to skip this, that is okay too.
Find a comfortable seat you can meditate in for the next couple of minutes. Begin to settle your bottom on the chair below. And begin to let your eyes soften down to the ground and perhaps come to a close if that feels all right for you. Just beginning by tapping into the breath, noticing how it feels in this moment, and let it soften, let it slow down. And focusing on any sounds around you, and just drawing awareness from whatever it is you might be hearing, and just noticing it and letting it go. And if there's thoughts that are spinning around in your head, let them flow in, but let them flow right back out, as if you're watching clouds floating by in the sky on a summer's day. Beginning to draw awareness back into your body. Just focusing on how it's feeling and observing without judgment. Feeling the belly relax and naturally rise and fall with the breath. Repeating this mantra to yourself for the next minute. I am present in my body. I am nourished and grounded. I am present in my body. I am nourished and grounded. I am present in my body. I am nourished and grounded. Keep repeating this silently to yourself for the next 5 breaths. Now drawing your awareness back into that space around you, noticing noises, sounds, sensations. Take a nice deep breath in and exhale, release. Gently blink your eyes open and continue with your day, feeling connected to your body, connected to the moment, present and nourished and grounded.
All right, a little recap from our last module, all about challenging the food police. Be curious about your beliefs instead of pushing them aside. Be curious about your thoughts. Have self-compassion. Come to your thoughts or your beliefs with curiosity instead of judgment. It's one of those quotes that I'll be repeating over and over again. Question your food and body beliefs or food and body thoughts. Get rid of the food police voices where you have control. And that really starts with social media, your social media channels. Were you able to evaluate those social media channels and see who you no longer want to follow or who is no longer bringing you joy? Important reminders that I will always talk about at the beginning of each module is that intuitive eating is not a diet. Intuitive eating is not rigid. There are no rules with intuitive eating. The first step in rejecting diet mentality and making progress in intuitive eating is developing self-compassion. Your intentions from last time. Remember, your beliefs and thoughts affect your feelings and then affect your behaviors. A negative thought or belief can have a negative effect on your entire day. We want to work on not letting that happen. So approach food and body thoughts or beliefs with questions and explore past experiences that may be able to help you change those beliefs and thoughts. Continue positive self-talk, coming at your thoughts, beliefs, and actions with curiosity instead of judgment. Remember that awareness is the first step to healing. Honestly, as you become more aware of your thoughts, you might realize you have a lot more negative thoughts than you ever thought. This is an important first step in healing and changing. When you find yourself in a negative thought pattern, look back and see what got you there at that moment in the first place. Be curious. What unmet need do you have right now that you might need? Might you need a book, a hug from yourself, a hug from a family member? Be curious instead of judgmental when you find yourself in those thoughts, having that thought pattern. Food only becomes bad or good when the food police get involved. We know certain foods have more nutrients, more fiber, more protein, of course. But as you start being more in tune with your body, you'll notice that over time, you choose more nutrient dense foods because of how they make you feel, not because you feel like you have to do that. A client once told me, and I loved this, consider all foods essentially break down to the same thing in our body. So I like to choose what I want to eat instead of what I think I should eat. I thought that was a really great quote because it really comes down to our dietary patterns. When you look at your diet as a whole, chances are choosing white bread over wheat bread in one lunch or even a few lunches or whatever, it doesn't make a difference in the long run. It's our dietary patterns that really make a difference. If that white bread is what brought you joy and makes you satisfied, that's what's more important. Were you able to review your food rules and really start to understand where they originated? What about your food fears, your fear foods? Have you been able to test more of those fear foods? And are you maybe starting to notice habituation yet? If not, that's fine. If you haven't even done this activity, that's fine too. Take this at your own pace. But you will start to notice habituation once you really truly give yourself unconditional permission to eat those fear foods. Let's take a look at the new principle, Feel Your Fullness, which can be found on pages 110 through 130 in your workbook. Key concepts for today: barriers to fullness or barriers to that body attunement. We talked about hunger, and now we're talking about fullness attunement. Being a member of the Clean Plate Club. Different characteristics of fullness. And fullness influencers or factors that influence actual fullness. So there's barriers to noticing your fullness, and then there's barriers to actually getting full. And we'll also talk about the last bite threshold. Let's start with barriers to fullness. Let's do a little review of interoceptive awareness, which we talked about back in Module 2, and this can be found on page 118. Interoceptive awareness is the ability to perceive the powerful cues of hunger and satiety and fullness and other sensations beyond food. Your ability to feel your body's signs of being tired or signs of being thirsty or having to go to the bathroom. That is all that interoceptive awareness and attunement. What can distract you from feeling all those signals, especially when it comes to fullness and hunger? If we're eating while we're distracted, we're not going to feel our fullness. If we're eating too fast, we may not notice our fullness. If primal hunger has taken over and we've ignored our hunger for too long, we might not feel our fullness. So what happens when primal hunger takes over is that we then probably eat too fast. And we eat without paying attention to how our body feels because primal hunger has taken over. So what I want you to do, just like the activity we did back in Module 2, where I had you stop and pay attention to if you could feel your heart rate, I want you to do a water drinking activity if you feel comfortable. It is listed on page 119, and the descriptions and instructions will be on that page. Essentially, you're going to get 2 full cups of water, preferably a little cold, to practice the perception of the physical sensations of fullness. You'll feel the water in your mouth. You'll swallow it. You'll feel it going down your esophagus and into your stomach. And eventually you'll start paying attention and noticing those nuanced signs that your body is giving that your stomach is full of that water. So go ahead and do that. And I'll also remind you at the end of this module if you'd rather do this later. I also want you to pause and start to reevaluate your self-care assessment. We're on the 5th principle, which means you're almost halfway through the modules for this course. Since interoceptive awareness and attunement is heavily influenced by self-care, I think it's a good time to reevaluate how you're doing with self-care. Do you think you can add more check marks at this point in your journey? If not, that's okay. Just be aware of your opportunities at this point. Let's quickly talk about different characteristics of fullness. We talked about this with regards to hunger, but what about fullness? How do you define fullness? Where do you feel fullness? Perhaps your stomach becomes physically tight and full. Just feels tighter. That's how I like to describe it. In my head, maybe I have a change of food thoughts. No longer am I thinking about food. I'm thinking about something else. My mood, I'm no longer hangry. My energy, I feel re-energized, or possibly even a little bit drowsy, as some people get after eating, especially at that certain time of the day, at least for me. Is there anything else that you can use to describe fullness? I know for me, sometimes I feel a tightness in my chest, or I notice my heart rate speed up. For me personally, that tends to be when I'm eating beyond my comfortable fullness. I notice signals like that. In this module, we'll discuss barriers to being aware of or noticing fullness, and then later, barriers to actually getting full. So there's a slight difference. We'll start with barriers to noticing fullness. Many of the same things we talked about when it comes to hunger attunement barriers or being attuned to the subtle hunger cues your body gives you apply here. Go ahead and pause this and do the assessment on pages 110 to 112, which talk about distraction, a major barrier to noticing fullness. So not only will distraction keep you from noticing fullness, but it may also keep you from fully enjoying all the tastes and flavors and textures of your food. Have you ever eaten a meal while being distracted by a television show or a meeting or whatever it is, only to realize that your plate is empty, but you didn't even enjoy what you ate since you were so distracted? When you're distracted while eating, it's a barrier to noticing fullness, and it's a barrier to satisfaction. Think of all the things you're missing out on, the sensory aspects of eating, the taste, whether the food is salty, sweet, umami, sour, bitter, the sound of the crunch when you're eating your food, the texture, whether it was smooth, soft, crunchy, the smell, and the appearance. When you are distracted as you eat, whether it's because you're working or watching TV or adding up calories in your head, you may not notice how good your food is or how full you're becoming. Eating to finish what's on your plate is an externally driven pattern of eating that will not help your body attunement. In fact, eating all that is on your plate reduces fullness attunement, because if you're always eating until your food is gone, you're primed to not listen to your body. If your goal is to finish what's on your plate, you're not paying attention to how your body feels. So this can be a barrier to feeling fullness. What are some reasons you may become or may be a member of the Clean Plate Club? Maybe this is habit. Maybe you've been doing this since you were a kid. Maybe you just tend to wait too long to eat, in which case you tend to eat everything on your plate because you've got primal hunger. Maybe you just tend to eat too fast. And when you eat too fast, sometimes you miss those subtle cues of fullness. Maybe you have a fear of impending deprivation. In other words, this may be my last time to eat for a while, whether because of food insecurity or self-imposed dieting. So you tend to eat everything on your plate. Maybe you don't like food to go to waste and you feel if you took the food, you need to eat it. Are you a member of the Clean Plate Club? Go ahead and take the Clean Plate assessment on pages 113 to 114 and pause until you're ready. Your ability to notice fullness and satiety or satisfaction is indirectly related to how many meals you've skipped and points in calories you've counted. So just like dieting is a barrier to feeling hunger, it's also a barrier to feeling fullness. Skipping meals or restricting in any other way means your primal hunger takes over and you lose your ability to notice fullness as you just try anything to give your body the nourishment it's lacking from skipping the meal. If you're sitting down to a meal, instead of thinking about how tasty it will be, you're adding up calories and points when you're dieting or whatever it is. And that is another barrier distracting you from enjoying your food and being attuned to your fullness. Even when you're attuned to your body's fullness, certain types of food can influence how quickly you feel full. So let's talk a little bit about what influences how much food it takes for you to become comfortably full. Protein, fat, fiber can all help you feel full quicker or full a little bit longer. You don't have to read the label to figure this out. We'll talk more about the specifics in the last principle, but generally speaking, yogurt, cheese, meat, seeds, beans, those are going to be good sources of protein. Seeds, beans, other vegetables, fruits, and whole grains are a great source of fiber. Sometimes they also have protein. Foods like oils, nuts, and seeds are a good source of fat. I like to add, fatty fish in there as well. This is not a suggestion for making sure you feel full and therefore eat less. It's simply a lifestyle tip. It's helpful to choose foods that are filling so you don't feel hungry and in need of food all day long. You want ultimately your goal to have food nourish you for at least, 3 to 5 hours. You're not eating constantly throughout the day or constantly thinking about food. It's also nice to know which foods fill you up more. And if you know you'll be going out for a long meeting, for example, or a long while without eating, it's good to know what food to eat to fill you up for a longer period of time. So again, foods with protein, fat, fiber. But it's also important to ask yourself, is it enjoyable? Because if you're not enjoying the food that you're eating, it's likely not going to keep you full very long either. Because even though you might physically be full, the fact that you're not satisfied will still have you searching for more food. Let me give you an example. Even if what you ate was loaded with protein, fat, or fiber, you're going into a meeting, you know you need to eat something. So you think, okay, protein, fat, and fiber. If it wasn't enjoyable, you're going to find yourself searching for food sooner than later, soon after you actually feel full from whatever you ate. So try to remember there's a difference between feeling physically full and being satisfied. So it's best to be physically full and satisfied. An example might be you ordered a burger without the bun. Sure, there's lots of protein, fat, but you really missed that bun as you were eating it. The mouthfeel, the action of picking up the burger and taking a bite of the burger instead of eating it with a fork, which is actually a much different experience. After you eat the burger without the bun, you'll likely feel full physically, but will you feel satisfied? You may be searching for that satisfaction very soon after the meal. We'll talk more about satisfaction in the next module. For now, let's talk more about what foods can make you feel fuller longer. Over the next few weeks, just pay attention to different snacks and meals and how long they keep you full. You can do the experiments on pages 122. I'll remind you of that later. Let's consider the following examples and what you might be able to add to these different foods to make them more filling. Go ahead and write down your own ideas too. So what would go well with oatmeal and what would make it more filling? I love oatmeal, but give it to me, plain with water. It might be filling. It could be more filling, but it's certainly not going to be satisfying. So how can we make it more satisfying and more filling? Maybe we can make it with milk. Maybe we could add berries, nuts, peanut butter, seeds, just some examples. What about an apple? Certainly has some fiber, but how can we make it even more filling and more satisfying? Maybe serve it with some peanut butter or some cheese. What about yogurt? Absolutely a good source of protein and oftentimes fat, but plain yogurt just isn't satisfying. And how can we make it even more filling? Let's add some more nuts, seeds, berries, granola. What about whole grain crackers? Certainly good, but could be made more satisfying and more filling by pairing the crackers with some cheese or some hummus, just as some quick examples. There are things called fullness influencers. So, an example might be the amount of time that has passed since your last meal, or how hungry were you when you started eating. That's going to influence how quickly you become full and how much food it takes you to be full. Another way of saying that is if you're famished going into a meal, it's going to take you more food to get to that fullness point. If you're not even hungry when you go into eating a meal, your barometer of fullness has no starting point, and you will likely eat more than what your body needs at the moment. Here are some more examples of social or fullness influencers, and that's social influences. Social influences may not only distract you from noticing your fullness, but may also distract you from listening to your fullness cues, and therefore you may find yourself eating past comfort. This doesn't mean you should never eat with others. Of course not. But just be aware of how your eating might change when you're with others. So again, eating while distracted can be an attunement disruptor. You're not going to notice your fullness. But eating while distracted might also just cause you to eat more to actually notice that fullness than you would have had you eaten alone. Be sure to remind those, another good point, that you are with, not to push food on you, and that you're listening to your body and feel like you've had enough when you get to that point. When eating out with friends, distraction is all the more reason not to get to the meal incredibly hungry, because that will increase your chance of eating past comfortable fullness. Again, I don't want you to never eat out with friends again. This is a natural part of life and a very enjoyable part of life. But just going into it knowing that this might distract me from feeling my fullness and it might distract me from actually getting full is just good to be aware of when you go into your next meal. If you're a label reader, I encourage you to start trying to forego reading the label, or at least just start paying attention to how the label influences your fullness. When you read the serving size and just eat the serving size, for example, do you ever notice that you don't actually get full? If we use the serving size as our indicator, that external cue of how much to eat, we're not listening to our body. The last bite threshold. The last bite threshold is a subtle experience that you'll begin to notice more and more as you become more attuned to your hunger and fullness. What it is, it's the end point of eating for now. Mindfulness and attention to how you feel is key. Being aware of how the food tastes is also key. Also, you're going to remind yourself when you get to this point, if you want more later, you can have it because now you have unconditional permission to eat all foods. You'll be able to determine this better after practicing fullness activities from the book. Here's what the last bite threshold might look like. Stop and pay attention as you're eating. Once you get maybe halfway into the meal, ask yourself, does the food still taste good? Is it still bringing me pleasure, or am I just eating it to eat it? How am I feeling physically? Am I starting to notice my stomach get a little bit fuller? Is it possible that this might be my last bite? Maybe it's not. Maybe you realize it's not and you continue eating. But then you can stop and do the activity again or ask yourself these questions again. Does the food still taste good? How am I feeling physically? Is this possibly my last bite? The good news is you now have unconditional permission to eat. So if you decide it's your last bite and you want to go back for more later, you absolutely can. This brings us to the end of this module. Just some further learning for you. We talked a lot about mindfulness in this module. So I wanted to make you aware of a book I listed in your resources page called Practicing Mindfulness, with some really short and sweet meditations. Also, the Insight Timer meditation app is one of my favorites. As far as assignments before the next module, if you didn't already do it, page 119, which is the water drinking activity to help you become more attuned to your fullness and what that feels like. Page 122, snack satiety experiment. Do you have some snacks that can be improved in terms of keeping you full longer or helping you fill up faster? Or you can even ask yourself, how can I make them more satisfying? Which again, we'll be talking more about at the next module. Page 127, the Fullness Discovery Scale. You can continue working on this throughout the course, but go ahead and start filling this one out. It's very similar to the Hunger Discovery Scale, but now it's focusing more on fullness and what that feels like. Intentions. Try mindful eating techniques that involve slowing down when eating and paying more attention to your food. Work on finding that last bite threshold. What does that feel like? What does that look like for you? Ask yourself, does the food still taste good? How do I feel right now? And might this be my last bite? If you're a member of the Clean Plate Club normally, after asking these questions, try leaving a few bites on your plate and see what happens. If you've never done that before, practice that now. If you hate letting food go to waste, rest assured that as you get better with hunger and fullness attunement and body trust, you'll also get better at taking the amount of food that is right for you in the moment. I hope you enjoyed this module, and remember to reach out to me at any time for questions or comments.